So hi everyone. So in the previous game we had an epic fail with regards to the mic. I forgot to plug in the wireless part in, so apologies for what has happened. And today we are going to play the last Sicilian Khan opening. The Sicilian, if I'm looking correctly, he's leading 8-7 at the moment, and with the last game it's probably going to go down. So we are playing against the Maroczy bind. We will play with the e6, develop the same way as we always do. We will prevent any knight b5 jumps, and we will try and control the d4 square where possible. Normally, white might think that we are trying to play the d5 push, but it's definitely not my intention. I just like to try one full-fledged game against a typical Maroczy bind and see how this can work for us. So white plays a3, and in some cases might want to play b4, or maybe he's preventing us jumping to b4, which is not something that we would like to do really. So we are playing against Panabek 1. I believe they are from Kazakhstan, looking at the flag. Panabek 1. They are 1452 rated, so almost 40 points stronger than us, so we'll see what happens in this game. I believe one of the ideas of a3 could be to play b4 in quick succession. But yeah, we don't worry about b4 move. I place knight takes d4, and we are going to develop the knight on f6, as we would have always done. So at the moment there isn't much I worry about. We are going to do the same development we are always doing. Nice and quiet. White plays h3, which to me doesn't make much sense unless white would like to push the pawn to g4 and attack us on the king side, but yeah, we just keep on developing normally. There's very little chance they would see us playing the Siberian trap attack in the previous game. So I think it's more of a cautious move from their side. So Maroczy bind, which is the e4 c4 structure, is a very strong. It's usually a very strong opening for white. So I don't know why it goes forward and now backwards with the knight, which is kind of strange. I don't see a reason for that. But for us, might be slightly difficult to develop our bishop from c8. So if bishop d3 happens, that's a time where I would like to think about pushing d5 pawn. It's not something that would work. b5 doesn't work. So basically this pawn is like very annoying, as the typical moves in Sicilian, both the d5 and c5, are now being restricted. We can play like a slow move. Actually, I'm feeling that some moves that we could do might be already very interesting for us, as we can start putting pressure on the c4 pawn. So one of my ideas is to play knight to a5. So now we are putting lots of pressure here, and if white plays b3, that I believe is a mistake. I think white needs to play knight to d2. So let's see if white will be able to find the correct move. b3 here looks as a mistake, because the knight on c3 will be under fire, and we will then potentially be able to attack the c4, and so the b5 will be a possibility after b3. So there's a question whether, and actually also move like d5 would be possible. What white has actually possibility, which I have missed, is to play pawn to e5 themselves. So well, we are going to go with the plan that we had, which is to play b5. Now white cannot capture with the pawn, which is the biggest issue for them, as the c3 knight is going to be hanging. But then again, pawn to e5 could cause us some issues. We might need to be pushing the pawn f5 forward, for example. Yeah, this could be a very interesting game. But again, pushing the pawn to e5 could mean that we potentially get stronger pawn center, even though the pawns will be hanging. But with the pawn like f5, we can probably protect most of our squares, and maybe potentially opening the f-file as well for our pieces. So there are possibilities of for white as well. But at the moment we are much stronger in the center, so we are going to try and use it to our advantage. And again, they still cannot take on b5. While at the same time, white with the queen e2 is now no longer protecting the b3 square. So that gives us a chance to win a dark square bishop, or play move like knight to c5 and try and win the knight, win the bishop on d3. But I believe the best way to approach this position is to first take the free pawn, attacking both the rook and the bishop. When the rook moves here, we are forcing the rook move again to c1. And now that the rook moved here, let's guess if you can find the next move. So what we don't want to do is, now that the rook is on c1, we don't want to open the c file. So that's why we are going to hit the knight with the move b4. And we are going to use the fact that we now have dark square bishop, or even pair of bishops, you can say, whilst white is not going to have that luxury. So white is all of a sudden losing a pawn. Oh, but I just fell for a big trap. White would want to play e5, and after knight e8, they will be able to play queen to e4. They will be able to play queen to e4, hitting the rook in a corner. But even though I have missed this, we are winning the queen back, because we are able to trap the queen with the move bishop to c5. So this could actually really nicely backfire for white pieces. So let's guide you through the line. First I will take on b4. White will play e5. I'll have to play knight to e8. Now white can play queen e4, threatening checkmate, to which we can play f5, stopping the checkmate. White's gonna take the rook in the corner. Now we're gonna play bishop b7. The queen has the only escape square, and then we take that square away with bishop to c5. The issue here is that white may play a move like knight to b5, hitting our queen. So we will need to protect our queen without losing it. And I believe that's not possible to protect our queen enough. But because the king hasn't castled yet, we can first give a check on a5, and then we are capturing the queen on a7. So this is a matter of calculation, and I hope it's going to work for us. So we are getting basically two pieces for a queen. So I would expect white to play e5 if they don't play e5. So now we obviously have the time to deal with the e4 situation or with the actual e5 threat. So what we are going to do is to play move d6 first, I believe. So we're gonna play d6. I can still push e5, but it's no longer so strong. And if they push c5, we should not worry about that as well. But it's a shame we didn't go into this very sharp line after e5, where this queen a5 move was very decisive. I've been thinking if I have a time in the future, I will be doing a couple of shorts from our games which could show some of the lines that we have not played, or some of the moments that were really interesting. The problem here is that the c5 will never work, as we are controlling this dark square with the bishop. So I suppose we can just keep on developing with bishop b7. And anything that will happen eventually on the b file we can oppose. So right now the material stands that we are up a pawn, thanks to this little maneuver on the queen side where white needed to be a little bit more precise than they actually were. And since they couldn't do that, then we have a good position. So white plays e5. It makes sense to open the bishop and the queen. So we will just simply take on e5. White will want to play a move like knight to e4. But we can always play just a simple response with bishop e7. It's not a typically winning position for us just yet because of the simple fact that so white wants to play knight e4 and they want to threaten us with the queen e4 move, which is sensible, understandable as well. And at first I was planning to play bishop e7, but the problem with bishop e7 is that knight takes f6, g takes f6, and then white has queen e4. But we can probably afford to lose the rook in a corner. Just simply by playing knight takes e4. If queen e4, we will play a move like g6. g6 or f5. And I feel move like f5 will be much stronger here. And yes, the truth is that white will be winning the rook in 2 rooks for the queen, most likely. But we will have that extra pawn. And now also extra pawn on e5. So I think we are going to walk into this troublesome line. So I'm also betting on the pawn on a6 potentially. So we are going to take here. So queen e4 is threatening both our king and our rook in the corner. So I decided to play f5 here to force things a little bit. And white is going into a line where he has to give us the queen for 2 rooks. If they're going to try and save the queen with queen a7, then we are getting the bishop as well. So right now we want rook for 2 pawns, but the queen doesn't have any escape squares right now. After queen a7, the locking bishop c5 is trapping the queen. The advantage also of our position, we are threatening to play e4 and we are threatening to play bishop to f3. So I think white will recognize that they cannot save the queen, so they might play queen takes f8. And then they need to directly respond to the issue with pawn to e4 move. And I believe just for my own safety, the best is to take back with the bishop takes f8, because the next move I'm expecting is white to play knight to g5. So I need to be able to hit that knight back with queen e7, whilst protecting this square, whilst also attacking the knight from here. The knight will have to protect itself with h3, and then I also, when the knight jumps on g5, I retain the king, protecting that important pawn on h7. So white has a chance to give the queen for the bishop here, and then recapture here with the knight, which gives them maybe some better chances to play the position, but then they have insufficient material for the queen. Now it would be good to ask how much is each piece worth. So queen f8. As I was saying, as I expect knight g5 as a follow-up to the threat e4, and that's why I need the king still to be on g8. That's why I'm taking back with a bishop. So now we have queen and 2 pawns for 2 rooks. 2 rooks are worth 10 points, and queen is usually worth 9 points. But we have also 2 pawns, so now we are still like a pawn up. But I believe we should be having much better position than white. And white needs to deal with this really difficult threat of e4. So again, you know, even that there has been some trades. I would still not rush with any moves. So knight g5 I was expecting. That's why I moved the bishop here, so I can protect here with the king. Now I'm protecting with the queen and hitting the knight. The knight under no circumstances should go back. White has to move h4, and now we are going to attack the knight. It also allows us to actually win a pawn here. We are winning the pawn on h4 because white's next logical move is to play knight to h3. And we are going to cash this pawn because it looks like a nice and healthy pawn for us. So this pawn we need to grab. And now white is going to do what they should do, is either to activate the rook on b1, or they will try and activate the rook through pushing the pawn to c5. So the c5 happens, and that's a reasonable move. Now the question is, if we have a move like queen g4, but they would like to push the pawn onto c6 already. So in this case we might need to give something. Queen g4 is a problem. And we shouldn't really let that pawn to start marching, so that being said, yes, we are going to stop the pawn from marching forward just for now. White will need to reorganize their pieces a little bit. Bishop takes a6 makes sense, so White is collecting one of their pawns back. My idea could be to hit the bishop with the queen to a4. And we want to do that for a simple reason, because I'm looking for tactics that could potentially work for us. But firstly, we are going to play queen to g4. The idea is that White will have to play move f3. And now we have one of our own ideas to try and win this pawn. We can either play bishop takes c5 already, but that could in itself get a little bit complicated. So I prefer first to play queen to a4 to see where is this bishop gonna go. Because if bishop wants to go to to d3, we are going to win that bishop. The problem is the bishop can potentially go to c4. Which is something that I have missed. Well, it's not biggest problem for us. What I like about this position that there is still quite a lot to solve for both sides. And bishop c8 is a very dangerous move for White, because after king f7, this bishop will no longer have a good square to go to. So potential of trapping that bishop is gonna increase with every move. So king f7. And now this bishop is running out of squares, so black will have to tread carefully. When I say black, I mean again our opponent. Always make the same mistakes. So we're gonna play bishop d7, e7, and the main reason for bishop e7 is to just take this square away from the rook on d4, rook on d1, so it cannot go to d8. And I believe also there's a huge possibility of us winning the actual piece. White will have potentially bishop d7 as a defense if we attack the bishop with queen a8. And bishop d7 will be defending the pawn. So rook a1 makes sense. So we are going to play queen b5. White knows probably that there's no point trying to protect this pawn. But we also want to keep the look keep the eye on the d7 square. It's a shame that we cannot really, as the position stand, we cannot really win the bishop on c8. But White has much higher margin of error here. But then again, let's suppose that now if we play queen b8, White has this bishop a6 escape. So I think my next best move is to play bishop takes c5 and bishop d4. So there's no stopping us from taking this pawn. And there's no reason for us to keep on dancing around that pawn. So right now is the time to attack the rook. Attack the rook on a1. You will eventually start pushing the e4 pawn, but I believe also what will be good is to put the bishop on d5 first. We need to be aware also not to let this rook just go yet onto c7 square. Hitting our queen is absolutely fine, something we cannot simply avoid. But I believe it's good to stay protected behind the pawn, behind the bishop. We are almost restricting white knight. So we need to be careful with some tactics, involving the light square bishop at the moment. And maybe actually when we play e4, we need to be also careful not to let this knight jump back in. So the knight probably would want to play knight g1. But my feeling is that we will leave everything as it stands and start pushing the g pawn forward. We are now under pressure. We are going to push forward with our plan. So, a little atypically, it's white who's got less time on clock. I'm really hoping that this mic has solved the issue. If not, we need to look for another solution. Because what I realize with regards to sound, I'm in too much of an open space. So all the syllables and plural, so I don't know even how you call those things. Okay, so white plays knight to g1, it makes sense, and they would like to play maybe knight to e2. But given our situation, we just don't have to worry about that at all. And I believe move g4 will be a good move for us. There is a tactical possibility of playing queen d8 and then queen h4. So some of the tactics might suddenly work. And yes, it feels like we can. It also looks like g takes f3 could potentially work as well. And I feel like g takes f3 again is more accurate. So first we will take here. So we have now 4 pawns and a queen against 2 rooks. And maybe quite surprisingly, we don't want to take this last pawn. First, we want to definitely recapture here. So now white has enabled us to improve our pawn structure. And we will come into quite a trickery, because what I want to play is queen to d8 with some tactics after bishop takes f3. So I believe white here is completely lost. No compensation whatsoever. These 3 pawns are probably worth a rook on their own. So rook e1 makes sense. And yeah, we should be afraid of bishop takes e6 here. So I can always play bishop d7 at worst, or e5. So right now I have 2 minutes left and I need to come up with some good move. And I feel like the best move is to play e5 here. We are letting this bishop to take on f5, but we are going to have some compensation nevertheless. Bishop f5 happens. We are losing a pawn. But now we have move f2. If rook e4, then we can play queen to a2. So I want to play this move. Because bishop e4 doesn't work, as we are taking the rook with the check. We are threatening checkmate at the same time, so white has to play rook to e4. To which we can play queen to a2. So as I was saying, bishop e4 totally doesn't work, because we will take first here. We are going to promote into a rook. So right now we have one rook. And after rook takes, we have still 1 minute 57 with 10 minutes increment, so it shouldn't be a problem. My idea here was to play queen a5, but the rook f1 is already an issue. So yes, we are going to play queen to c4. White will have the chance to win the pawn back, but rook against the queen and the extra pawn in the center is just no chance for white. So bishop c6, queen c6. White is fighting against the windmills. So queen and a pawn against the rook. And now actually they couldn't even take here, because we have the simple maneuver of our queen. The king has to go to h2. Queen f4 wins the rook. And we will have another torturous session, unless white resign, which they rightly so did. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this game as well. I hope it was slightly instructive. We did some high level stuff with the b5. And the rest of the game was about dynamic conversion, as I would call it, because we had material that was working better against whites. We had to give some pawn back, like the a6 pawn, for example. We had to let the center being blown apart at some point, but we never lost the advantage going towards conversion. And yeah, it was a good game from our opponent, I must say. But yeah, we are winning again. I'll see you in the next game, and I hope the mic issues were resolved. I really do. Take care for now. Bye-bye.